The sun hung high over Zeron Air Base, casting hard shadows beneath the aircraft shelters and shimmering heat across the tarmac. The desert wind carried the scent of jet fuel and scorched concrete. In the middle distance, ground crews moved in rhythm, prepping a lineup of F-16s beneath the roar of passing jets. Everything pulsed with purpose, and everyone seemed to know where they belonged except for the woman who had just stepped down from the back of a transport truck, unannounced, unnoticed. Mira walked with measured steps, a standard-issue flight suit clinging to her frame, its shoulders unmarked by rank or unit patches. A folded briefing folder was tucked under her arm. Her expression was unreadable, calm, as she scanned the row of jets without urgency. She moved like someone used to being overlooked, eyes focused, steps light, cutting across the hangar bay without interrupting a single conversation. No introductions followed her. No one approached. Near one of the aircraft, a British pilot leaned against a tow tractor, adjusting his gloves. His voice cut through the air, sharp and casual. "Oi!" Someone lose their translator. He nodded toward Mira without looking directly at her. "She looks like she's here to give the weather report." Laughter buzzed around the refueling station. An American tech in grease-smudged sleeves muttered, "Probably admin, here for clipboard duty." Mira kept walking. She said nothing. Her gaze brushed over them once, then returned to the wing structure of the nearest F-16. Her boots crunched softly over the sand-swept concrete. Behind her, the chatter resumed, disinterested and dismissive. She didn't seem to hear. Or maybe she just didn't need to respond. The air shifted, but no one noticed her stillness. Not yet. The briefing tent was larger than it looked from the outside, held up by steel supports and cooled by roaring floor units that barely held off the heat. Inside, a dozen projectors hummed overhead, casting overlapping maps and radar overlays across the canvas walls. The air was dense with clipped sentences, coffee breath, and the low static of radios. Uniforms shifted in rows, chairs scraped the metal floor, and every head turned briefly when the flap rustled open. Mira stepped inside without a sound. She carried nothing but the flight folder still tucked under her arm. The rankless badge on her chest drew glances. Not the kind that welcomed. Not the kind that expected skill. She scanned the room quickly, 3 rows of chairs, half already filled by squadron leaders and tactical analysts. There were no empty seats. No one made room. At the far side of the tent, Razor slouched in his chair, one boot kicked over the other. His headset hung crooked around his neck. When he spotted Mira standing alone, his smile curled like a blade. Look who wandered in. Admin must have lost the mailroom key. No one laughed at first. Then someone chuckled. A Belgian pilot leaned toward the man beside him. Is she Observer Corps or just a misfiled translator? Their voices weren't loud, but they weren't exactly hidden. Mira remained standing, her posture unchanged. She didn't look at anyone directly. She turned toward the tactical board instead, where the sim field was being loaded for the final training event. The lead instructor, a grizzled American major with a deep tan and a bad knee, called out names and call signs: Alpha Team, Delta Team, then Bravo. The room shifted with attention. Bravo, 3 Viper 3, he read, glancing down at the display. His voice caught just a fraction of a pause. Then he looked up and spotted her in the corner. Someone exhaled audibly. Razor leaned forward, grinning. "You're kidding." His voice wasn't loud, but the timing made it land like a slap. Viper 3. She's flying. Across the room, a clipboard clacked to the floor as an aide tried to hide his smirk. A junior officer beside him whispered, "How fast you think she gets clipped?" Someone else replied, 2 minutes. 3, if she forgets how to turn. The instructor made no correction. He tapped the screen once and moved on, listing flight groups and digital ID numbers. Mira stepped quietly to the side table. No one stopped her. No one handed her the printed sim deck. A folder was nudged toward her by the corner. like a receipt at a diner. She took it, opened it, and flipped silently to the map spread. The screen behind the instructor cycled through terrain maps, target bands, and simulated air corridors. No one spoke to her. No one asked if she understood the objectives. One captain from the German Air Command narrowed his eyes at her name on the list, then shrugged and looked away. Across the tent, unopened water bottles lined a folding table. Not a single one made its way toward her. Razor stood slowly as the briefing wrapped, stretching with theatrical fatigue. "Hope she knows which end's up," he said. "We're running this sim in full-lock combat mode, not sightseeing." His voice carried easily. A few pilots chuckled, then quickly masked it behind throat clearing and file shuffling. Mira studied the map. She said nothing. Her eyes flicked to the electronic layout as the final sim was loaded onto tablets around the room. The roster glowed with assignments. Bravo 3, Viper 3, her call sign in bold white on the left screen. The murmurs returned. One of the instructors glanced again at her ID chip. His frown was small but noticeable. He tapped a corner of his tablet, hesitated, then looked away without comment. There was a ripple of confusion across the back row. A few glances shifted toward a higher-ranking official seated near the edge of the tent, but no one spoke. As the room began to clear, Razor walked past her, headset in hand. "Better pray they don't tag you first." "Viper," he said, not quite laughing. "We've got 3 kills ready and nothing to shoot at yet." Mira's voice came then, low and level. "You'll get your chance." He paused, just long enough to look at her again. For a moment, he seemed ready to fire off another quip, but something in her expression checked the impulse. He gave a small shake of his head and walked on. The tent emptied slowly. The projection screens dimmed, the final pre-flight sync already underway. Mira stood by herself for another few seconds, scanning the rest of the assignments. Then she turned and left through the side flap. Her flight folder pressed calmly to her chest. Her steps, even, unhurried. The name on the screen remained long after the others faded. Viper 3. The last name no one knew. The one they would all remember soon. The locker room was silent except for the low hum of the lights and the soft clink of Mira's gear as she laid it out, piece by piece. The walls, painted a faded beige, were streaked with oil smudges and age. Dawn had not yet breached the horizon, but a pale thread of light slipped beneath the hangar door at the far end, casting long shadows across the metal bench. The air smelled of old steel, sweat, and the faint tang of jet fuel. It was the kind of space where silence had weight, and Mira moved through it without breaking the stillness. Her helmet sat on the bench beside her, its matte shell marked with use, the visor clean and carefully wiped. She tightened the chest straps on her flight harness with slow precision. Every movement was practiced, but unhurried. In her open locker, wedged between spare gloves and a sealed packet of wipes, rested a folded map. She reached for it quietly and opened it with care. The lines were familiar air corridors, simulated boundary zones, elevation markers, but across one corner in faint graphite, was a curve unlike the others, a hand-drawn arc traced across the map's margin, annotated in shorthand no one else had ever used. She stared at it for a long time. Her fingers rested lightly along its path, not to trace it again, but to anchor herself in its memory. She hadn't seen that curve on any official document, only once, late at night, years ago. Nash had drawn it on a clipboard during a break between sessions, his voice low and tired. "It works in theory," he had said, "but not for peace. It's too fast, too precise. You'd have to make the sky bend for you." Then he erased it without another word. That was Nash. Nothing ever explained twice. He spoke like every moment mattered, and every silence even more. He taught with a look, a nod, a pause at the right time. The only way to prove you understood was to survive the next sortie. Mira had never asked for extra time, never demanded clarity. She just listened. And she remembered. She remembered the canyon flight too. No lights, no comms. Just her and the simulator at full tilt, diving through a digital valley designed to mimic real terrain. The rules said to pull up. Nash said nothing, so she stayed low. Every ridge edge snapped past her field of vision like a blade. When she landed, he didn't speak. He only nodded once. That had been enough. She remembered the news of his crash as if it had arrived without words. No briefing, no debrief. Just a terminal screen blinking red and an empty desk the next day. Others cried. Others speculated. Mira did what she always did. She studied. The black box footage had been sealed, but the logs weren't. The timestamps, the velocity reports, the control inputs. She had memorized them all. Not out of mourning, but respect. Now, in the silence of the locker room, she folded the map again and returned it to the shelf. At the back of the locker, pinned beneath a strip of worn Velcro, was a faded pilot patch Nash's. The thread along the edges was frayed, the insignia barely visible. Mira didn't touch it. She simply looked at it, her face unreadable. Then she reached for her helmet and set it gently beside an old metal tag. The light outside shifted, warming to gold. Somewhere in the distance, a pair of engines roared to life. Mira exhaled once and turned toward the hangar doors, her footsteps soft and deliberate on the concrete floor. The simulation loaded with a low rumble through Mira's headset, syncing the artificial terrain to her visual grid. The world around her reformed into sharp-edged mesas, dust-blown corridors, and shimmering thermal ridgelines. Her HUD adjusted for contrast, flickering briefly before locking on to the mission overlay. Targets, friendlies, no-fly zones, and boundary lines all snapped into place. The cockpit hummed with the illusion of flight, a blend of realism and digital architecture. Her call sign blinked in the upper left Viper 3. Bravo Team's lead came through first. Clipped and focused. Form Delta spread. Maintain rear coverage. Mira tapped her input pad twice. Her F-16 dropped into slot just behind Bravo 2 eyes scanning the terrain corridor unfolding ahead. Nothing yet. Then Razor's voice cracked in from the other side. Alpha Team engaging from the ridge west. Stay awake. Bravo. Might get bumpy. Within seconds, two targets blinked to life on Mira's scope. Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 approached from opposite angles, their arcs fanning like a net. Bravo 1 snapped out a heading correction. Evade pattern 9. Pull right hard. Now. Mira pulled as instructed, holding formation tight. Her instruments flared briefly as the radar lit up again. One lock, then two. Her screen began to glow red. Bravo 2 peeled away. No time to ask why. The formation splintered as Alpha 3 curved low across the ravine, cutting a line between Mira and the outer boundary. It was a textbook pincer, fast, tight, and intentional. She recognized the tactic immediately. They weren't targeting her team. They were isolating her. Box the flank. Force the error. Her HUD flashed radar lock detected. An arc of red swept in from the top right corner of her vision. She banked left, sensors screaming. Another lock flared, then settled. Double lock. Mira didn't respond. Her altitude was dropping steadily. A smooth glide toward the canyon basin embedded in the sim. The comms lit up again, this time from the instructor tower. Viper 3 is pinned. Standard eject countdown engaged. The tone was flat, administrative, not concerned. A protocol statement, not a warning. Across the channel, Razor's voice returned, casual and amused. Looks like she forgot her way out. Maybe someone hand her the manual. Mira adjusted the throttle. She tapped the terrain display once, adjusted her pitch angle by half a degree, and eased further into descent. The simulated ridgeline ahead sharpened. Dust trails lifted from rendered soil. Wind noise increased as the altitude ticked downward. The flashing prompt in her HUD changed. Eject recommended. From the outside, the maneuver looked like desperation. A slow drop into a kill zone. No flares deployed. No counter-pitch. Razor's team continued their descent from above, holding lock but not firing. They wanted the sim to show the score Bravo 3 forced to fail. Inside her cockpit, Mira's fingers danced over the flight pad. Her breathing didn't change. Her posture remained still. The red glow intensified around the edges of her display. Her position was almost pinned to the ground seconds from being ruled out. The next ping would solidify a simulated kill. Two warning tones began to overlap, signaling terminal exposure. Still she didn't speak. Her hand hovered over the stick. The HUD drew an arc along the terrain line, a curve so tight, so low, it wasn't supposed to be possible in this theater. Mira pulled back gently on the yoke, angling the nose down further. Beneath her, the canyon tightened. Two vertical bluffs raced past her sides, coded with collision alerts and terrain warnings. She ignored all of them. The instructors watched her on a side monitor. One leaned forward. What's she doing? The others didn't answer. No one had seen a line like that in years. Above her, Razor's radar blinked, then blinked again. His lock shifted. Mira was gone. The double ping fractured into static. In the sim feed, her altitude hit the lowest threshold before disqualification. Her icon pulsed. The sim engine tried to process her current trajectory and failed to predict an outcome. Razor opened his comm once more, his voice less certain now. Is she diving into the floor? There was no answer. Mira was already moving, not down anymore, but sideways, tight, flat, fast. The HUD cleared for half a second, then all hell broke loose, but the roll itself hadn't started yet. Not yet. Mira pulled the stick gently into her palm and eased the throttle into the final segment of the descent. The walls of the canyon constricted around her, jagged stone formations rendered with brutal detail by the sim engine. Her HUD pulsed with overlapping alerts. Altitude warning, lock confirmation, eject now. The perimeter of her vision blurred slightly under G-force pressure. The aircraft shuddered in resistance, but her grip held steady. Every alarm flashed red. Every input screamed no. But Mira was already gone from where they expected her to be. She inverted. The barrel roll began so low it nearly tripped the simulation's crash boundary. Her wings sliced a tight lateral spiral through the virtual floor space, passing within inches of terrain markers designed only for orientation, not for flight. The motion was seamless, not rushed, not panicked. Each revolution compressed to maximize energy retention and visual acquisition. Inside the cockpit, Mira's body shifted with the torque, her spine aligned with the roll, her breath tight but controlled. Outside, the sim's tracking system struggled to render the movement in real time. In the control tower, a row of monitors glitched. A technician swore under his breath. Tracking's not catching, she's below the thermal grid. An instructor leaned forward, eyes narrowed. Another screen displayed her live telemetry, a cascade of numbers flickering in confusion. The curved path arcing across her trail was unlike anything programmed into the sim. Razor's HUD went white. His radar sweep vanished for half a second, then flashed a ghost echo before blanking again. His grip tightened on the yoke. "Where is she?" he said into the open channel, but no one answered. A second later, a lock alert appeared behind him. Mira came out of the roll with minimal correction. No celebration, just a tight curve upward, her angle clean, position precise. Her first missile tag struck Alpha 1 with 0 deviation. A bright red X lit the sim overlay. The aircraft spiraled out of view in the simulation space. She banked again. The second tag came 6 seconds later, locked from beneath a shelf of simulated stone. Alpha 2's pilot didn't even turn before the system registered the hit. His icon blinked, then faded. By the time Razor realized what was happening, Mira had climbed above him. His altitude advantage had become a liability. He rolled left, cut throttle, tried to dip into a turning escape arc. Too late. Her third lock dropped in behind him. Red ring. Fire. Kill confirmed. From the sim's bird's eye feed, the entire move played back in digital trail lines. Mira's aircraft had disappeared under the radar dome, rolled beneath the scan net, and emerged behind all three aggressors. Her loop was tight, mathematically impossible by standard doctrine, and somehow executed without a single HUD misstep. The trail map froze. A perfect mirrored curve traced from the bottom of the canyon to the upper edge of the combat zone, arching backward through the hostile net. In the ops room, no one spoke. The usual commentary channel went dead. One senior officer leaned closer to the monitor. "Replay that," he said quietly. Another did. Slower this time. The motion rendered again, smoother now, parsed by AI correction. The path shimmered like drawn steel. It was too graceful to be accidental, too low to be trained, too fast to be fully understood. No system error flagged it. No rule violation was registered. The sim didn't even know how to penalize it. The red lights on Bravo Team's scoreboard turned green. The scoreboard reset. All other icons vanished. Only one plane remained in the simulation. Viper 3. Mira's F-16 hovered in simulated free flight over the end boundary. A hold pattern awaiting mission clearance. No further targets, no threats. Just her, alone on the grid. Razor's cockpit was dim, his comms silent. He stared at the blank radar sweep where her signature had vanished and reappeared without warning. Inside the control tower, a junior analyst whispered without thinking. That was Nash's maneuver. That arc. But no one finished the thought. The senior officer just watched the screen, unmoving. Mira didn't speak. Her hands hovered over the controls, one resting against the throttle, the other on the stick. Her face was unreadable beneath the visor. The cockpit's internal lights cast faint reflections across the glass. Her breathing was steady. Not a muscle moved. The sim ended without fanfare. One final chime sounded. Her aircraft eased into descent for simulation exit. No replay was queued. No explanation requested. The maneuver was logged automatically in the training archive, tagged with its origin and timestamp. A new subdirectory generated under the Joint Exercise Records Viper 3 Maneuver File 211B. Notation pending review. On the master screen. Her flight path remained. The curve was still there. Impossible. Undeniable. Beautiful. And no one knew what to say. In the control room, no one moved. The last frame of the simulation remained frozen on the primary monitor, its curve glowing faintly in red against a blue terrain overlay. Technicians stared at the arc, then at one another, then back again. No one touched the console. The trail Mira had flown cut across the screen like a scar too deliberate to be instinct, too flawless to be luck. A colonel stepped forward, arms folded tightly across his chest. His voice was quiet, but every syllable landed. That was Nash's flight path. The sentence hung in the air like static. A younger analyst beside him looked up sharply, confused. But that arc was never filed. It's not in the maneuver library. The colonel didn't respond. His jaw clenched once. Then he turned away. On the secondary screen, Mira's aircraft had already landed and was rolling back toward the hangar bay. No commentary had resumed. No briefing summary had been issued. Even the sim feed remained muted. Someone tried to refresh the mission report. The system flagged the maneuver data with a manual review required tag. Inside the hangar, the sound of wheels on concrete echoed sharp and real. Mira stepped down from the cockpit ladder in silence, helmet in one hand, gloves in the other. No one clapped. No one called her name. A few ground crew members glanced up from their stations, eyes narrowing slightly, but said nothing. She moved past them as if through fog, posture steady, pace even. An older instructor stood by the monitor near the wall, watching the replay alone. The curved path scrolled once more, slower this time. It hadn't changed. A general near the back leaned toward his aide and murmured, "Where did she train?" The aide gave no answer. No one did. Mira walked through the corridor leading from the simulator bay to the debrief area. She passed officers she didn't know. each one stepping slightly aside to give her room, though none would admit why. She kept her gaze forward. Her boots landed clean on the polished floor. The voices behind her were low, tight with something that wasn't quite confusion anymore. It was something else. Calculation. Respect. Something earned too late. Outside the hangar, the sun was beginning to fall. The wind had picked up across the airstrip. Razor stood alone by the edge of the lot, one hand resting on the railing, the other holding a bottle of water. He didn't grin. He didn't speak right away. His flight jacket was half zipped, headset still dangling from his collar. Mira stepped past him without looking. He turned to follow her with his eyes, then took 2 quiet steps to catch up. No bravado in his voice now. Didn't know Nash trained ghosts, he said, more to the space between them than to her directly. She stopped. Just for a moment. Not long enough to give him satisfaction. Not long enough to show pause. She didn't turn her head when she answered. He trained pilots. I just listened harder. Then she kept walking. Razor stood still. He didn't follow. The water bottle remained in his hand, unopened. Back in the control room. The monitor still displayed the flight path. No one had removed it. No one had the nerve. It remained there in silence, as if the system itself didn't know how to categorize what had happened. There were no accolades, no ribbons, no formal acknowledgement, but everyone in the room knew what they had seen. And none of them would ever forget the name Viper 3. Not because it had been printed on a mission report, but because it had redrawn the rules without asking permission. The sun was almost gone when Mira stepped out of the main hangar, the last light falling across the concrete in long golden lines. The air was cooling fast, and the wind carried the scent of oil and sand. Behind her, the simulation bay remained active, but she didn't turn back. She walked slowly toward the far end of the airfield, past the parked transport units and silent aircraft lined up in shadow. Her gear was neatly strapped to her side. No one followed. No one called her name. A smaller hangar waited ahead, tucked near the boundary fence. It hadn't seen use in months. Its doors were half open, rusted slightly at the hinges. Inside, the light was dim, lit only by the last edge of dusk and the soft flicker of a dying overhead bulb. Her boots echoed on the floor as she stepped through. The space was empty, but familiar. A row of unused lockers stretched along the wall. She stopped at the one furthest from the entrance. Mira placed her helmet on the bench first, then unstrapped the harness from her torso. Her movements were deliberate, unrushed. She folded the harness with care, pressed it flat, and tucked it inside the lower shelf. Then she reached into the interior pocket of her flight jacket and removed a small, cloth-wrapped item. She opened it carefully. Inside was a weathered flight patch, frayed along the edges. Its stitching faded to gray. The emblem was still clear, Nash's old squadron insignia. She knelt slightly and placed the patch inside the locker. There was nothing ceremonial in her action. No gesture for effect. Just precision. The way she had been taught. She closed the locker door without a sound, pressed the latch shut, and stood still for a few seconds, eyes resting on the metal surface. Outside, the night had taken hold. She stepped back into the open, the sky dark now, stars beginning to emerge above the silent airfield. The parked jets reflected dim light, their silhouettes sharp against the black. Mira turned toward the outer gate and walked into the distance, her figure shrinking with each step until she was gone. Far from the base, weeks later, a trainee sat alone in a quiet flight lab at a smaller installation. Her uniform was clean, her notes spread out across a metal desk lit only by a single desk lamp. The room was filled with the low hum of a projector cycling through combat recordings. She leaned forward, hand resting lightly on the input pad, watching the footage play again. It was silent. No narration. No annotations. just a real-time flight trail threading across the map. The curve began. The aircraft dropped low, then spun into an inverted roll just above the terrain floor. The young pilot's eyes widened. She tapped to rewind, played it again. The trail bent, curved, then vanished and reappeared behind 3 targets. 3 simulated kills. Each clean, each instant. She paused the frame, stared at the maneuver path frozen on the screen. It wasn't part of the lesson plan. She turned to her instructor, seated a few feet away, arms crossed and expression unreadable. "Who was that?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His gaze lingered on the paused frame, on the line that had no name and no title. Then he looked at her and spoke evenly. Someone who never stopped listening. The girl nodded once, then turned back to the screen. She tapped the pad again, starting the sequence from the beginning. The room stayed silent. The footage played on. There were no medals listed in the corner, no identification tags, no music, just the arc, impossibly clean, looping through the simulated canyon like a whisper from a forgotten teacher. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, but it changed something. The instructor didn't move. He had seen it more than once, but it never faded. It wasn't just the maneuver. It was the control, the clarity, the quiet conviction it took to pull that kind of line when every system said no. He'd seen hundreds of pilots chase speed, style, domination, but he hadn't seen that level of restraint paired with precision in a long time. Outside, the lights of the base cast soft circles across the pavement. A flag hung still in the calm. Somewhere in the dark, another young pilot began their shift, unaware that a legacy had just passed through the quiet. No announcement followed, no update to the curriculum, but every instructor on that floor had now seen the recording, and every student who asked about it would receive no technical briefing, no written account, only the story, only the example. And for Mira, that was enough. You just witnessed the story of a woman who was underestimated, overlooked, and written off before she ever stepped into the cockpit. In a world that measured worth by noise and recognition, she chose silence, precision, and purpose. Mira didn't ask to be seen. She simply flew the line no one else dared to imagine, and in doing so, she redrew what was possible. This is a story of quiet strength, of legacy carried without praise, and of how real power often moves unseen. If her journey moved you, take a moment to reflect. What does it mean to lead without seeking credit, to act when no one believes in you? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe in stories that reveal the quiet brilliance in all of us, follow along for more. Because sometimes the most powerful flight leaves no sound, only a lasting trace.